This is Rachel Ozanne. I am the editor and author of the introduction to a new book coming out this year with UT Press called Biscuits, the Dole, and Nodding Donkeys, Texas Politics from 1929 to 1932. The original author of the book manuscript was a man named Norman Brown, who was a professor of Texas history at UT Austin for almost 50 years. Professor Brown passed away before he was able to complete this book manuscript. It was a sequel to a book called Bonnet and Little Brown Jug that covered Texas politics in the 1920s. Professor Brown called the book Bonnet and Little Brown Jug to make reference to the three major political issues of Texas in the 1920s. The hood being the Ku Klux Klan, the bonnet being the governorship of Miriam Ma Ferguson, and Little Brown Jug referring to the ongoing fight over whether or not Prohibition should continue in the state of Texas and in the United States after the passage of the 18th Amendment. When I received Professor Brown's manuscript, it needed a new introduction to be written. It also didn't have a title, and I decided to call the book Biscuits, the Dole, and Nodding Donkeys to make reference to Professor Brown's first book and to highlight both the continuities and discontinuities from the 1920s into the early 1930s in state politics in Texas. I chose the terms Biscuits, the Dole, and Nodding Donkeys to refer to some of the major issues facing Texans between 1929 and 1932, and somewhat on into the rest of the 1930s. Biscuits refers to the continued presence of Miriam Ferguson and her husband Jim Ferguson, known more often as Ma and Pa Ferguson. I reference Biscuits because Jim Ferguson talked about the fact that being in politics basically meant that you had to keep the people satisfied, right? And so the way you keep the people satisfied is by giving them a biscuit. And as long as you have biscuits to give out, the people will be happy with you, right? But as soon as you run out of biscuits, the people are no longer happy. So Biscuits representing this tension between progressivizing forces represented by Dan Moody and Governor Ross Sterling compared to the rural people that tended to support the Fergusons and sort of more populist movements. I then chose the Dole as the second image for the title because with 1929, the Great Depression began in the United States, and many Texans originally hoped that Texas would be able to be exempted from the suffering caused by the Great Depression because Texas was so far removed from New York City, from the stock exchange. Texans had also had a really successful year with the cotton harvest in 1929, and of course, were making lots of money from oil. But, of course, the Great Depression eventually did reach the state of Texas, and one of the major issues facing Texans then was how to support people throughout the Depression, and there was ongoing conflict about just how much government intervention Texans were really willing to put up with. So the Dole helps us to understand the ambivalence of many Texans who preferred the sort of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality as compared to those who were interested in seeing federal funding come into the state. Finally, the last image of the title is the Nodding Donkeys, and this refers to an image that will be familiar to many people in the state of Texas, right? The pump jack, the single oil pump technology, right? The nodding donkey. Oil had been a significant economic resource in the state of Texas since 1901. When the major discovery of oil at Spindletop occurred. But in the late 1920s, oil was discovered in East Texas. Many people rushed to East Texas, right, trying to take advantage of this new gushing oil that had been discovered. As small-time producers, right, single oil producers wanted to make sure that there was as little regulation of the oil industry as possible. They saw any efforts to try to regulate prices, regulate production, as infringing upon the small-time producers' ability to compete with larger producers. But the problem was that people were producing so much oil that it was driving prices down. And Texans hoped that the oil industry would be able to stabilize the state's economy and help people get through the Great Depression. So those are the three terms that signify what this book is about, right? Biscuits, the Dole, and Nodding Donkeys.